inside of a person. Well, it was coming out from the inside of the person, and that's why, the light that you have, could shine.
Okay.
So you get those same kinds of things when you take the Book of Mormon, you put them into a Mesoamerican culture. You say, do the things about the Mesoamerican culture, begin to explain the text. And just as if we put it in the wrong place, it wouldn't tell us a thing. If we put it in the right place, it begins to make more sense out of the text than it would if we did not have that location.
Yeah. Understanding, of course, that with this understanding that we physically can't know everything about the ancient Maya culture, the ancient Aztecs, the ancient Incas. There was just too much destruction as far as that goes.
We can't know everything about any modern culture either. We have newspapers. And,
yes, you and I know that. We're pseudo-scholars.
Yeah. But you read a newspaper and tell me if you understand everything about the modern American culture. And then as soon as you do that, tell me why it's different in the next paper over that has a different political bent and why they seem to be different. Why don't we always get exactly the same information?
Good point.
So, even in the modern world where we know so much, we still don't know everything, and we can't know everything.
Yeah.
And it gets even worse the more we go back into history.
So is it true what I've heard? I've talked to Richard Hansen a few times. It's been a few years now, though. It's been a little while, but he's the UCLA. He was out of UCLA. Right now he's at Idaho State, just south of me in Idaho. But he's been doing some digs in El Mirador and all that. But he was basically saying that the timeline, the extent of the influence, the size, everything about the Maya has been in the last decade shifting, and we're finding now that the Maya were actually much earlier than we had anticipated. I mean, the classic is they began 600-700 A.D. That's what I was taught as a teenager. But now Richard informed me a while back that we can take them all the way back to B.C. times now. Is that fairly accurate? What's the current status on Mesoamerican culture?
It's a question of what development. What you get from 600 or AD 600 on is certainly a different elaboration of what you get from the earlier times. But you do find in the earlier times much more sophistication than they expected. Too many people bought into the evolutionary timeline and presumed that you would always start simple and get more complex, and then the closer you got to us, the more complex it was. What they're finding is things were much more complex much earlier than they had thought. So they're finding, for instance...
And that will certainly change our paradigm quick.
Well, yeah, everything changes that way. One of the things that rapidly changed everything was the discovery of the murals in San Bartolo. These are, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 100 AD, maybe 100 BC.
On ancient temples or tombs?
These
where were they?
Murals that were in an Aztec temple.
Okay.
Or not Aztec, Maya temple. And as they get inside, they find these wonderful murals, and the murals are depicting Maya artistic scenes, religious scenes, that we're seeing much later, and all of a sudden, several hundred years earlier, when we're not expecting them. Here they are in full development.
And they're dating those 100 A.D.
Right. And so what
interesting.
we're finding is that the major difference isn't necessarily that at some point in time they finally developed all this wonderful culture. What we're finding is at this particular point in time, they finally decided to start carving it in stone. Earlier, they were painting it, and we've lost the paintings. But apparently these paintings were just as elaborate and just as wonderful as the carvings.
How interesting.
But we've lost them. But when you finally get back and by accident find this particular mural, it's way earlier than they expected, but here is this complex artistic style. It's just as sophisticated as what we get much later. There is a glyphic text with it, but the glyphs are in earlier form and they cannot read all of them. So the glyphic language has changed over time, but that doesn't mean it was invented later or that it showed up later.
Right,
We just have different formats, and what it says is we've lost a lot because it was painted, not carved, and things...
God, it's fascinating, and just a subtle difference in a cultural, artistic thing, and we lose myriads of amounts of information.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, what they had thought was this classic evolution of the Maya is now moving way back in time when they didn't expect that there would be something that sophisticated.
Okay, yeah, Richard never brought out the art of it, so thank you for that.
That's more
interesting.
recent. That's just last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, that's why that's been about how long it's been since I've talked to Richard. Okay, so the real question that folks want to hear: has your you say by studying the surrounding cultures with the Book of Mormon can help us illuminate some really odd passages in the Book of Mormon, or just help us understand the overall approach to how men treat women, women treat men, how they act in warfare and all that. Have you really truly found it helpful for you? Now, you've been doing this all your life. You've been on the Mesoamerican aspect of things your whole life. I know you study a whole lot on the Old World too. You're an avid reader, but the Mesoamerican's your heart's love.
Yeah,
but have you really truly found that it helps make more sense in the Book of Mormon than, say, I know there are some LDS and there are lots of critics who say that we are looking in the wrong spot, that it needs to be up in North America. Why, maybe just a couple of examples. What is the problem with viewing it in a North American context, as opposed to down in a Mesoamerican context?
Let me see if I can give you the short version of
yeah.
one of my favorite stories.
Oh, okay.
The anti-Nephi Lehis are just this wonderful story because we get at people who are apparently these wonderful pacifists, and they refuse to go to war, so much so that they're slaughtered, and then later they go up to Nephite lands and they still refuse to fight. But then a war comes and they're considering fighting, but they decide not to for their souls and decide to send off the stripling warriors, and we have the stripling warriors, and we love that story. And what we don't realize is this is just really a crazy story, because you have people who are so pacifist that they won't fight, but they think it's okay to send their 12 and 14-year-old sons out to fight. That's okay. That seems a little bit weird to me. The next thing is, everything about that story just doesn't make a lot of sense. When they're being killed down in Lamanite territory, the Lamanites come in, they say they have this bloodlust, and so they start killing all these people. And then they say, well, I'm already done, and because I'm done fighting with them, I've stopped, but I still want to kill somebody, so I think I'll go to the city of Ammonite, which is about a 3 days march away. And somewhere in this 3 days march away, you figure I'm not as mad as I was 2 or 3 days ago, and I really don't necessarily want to kill somebody, but they do it anyway. And then they come back, and this is the only story in the Book of Mormon where they destroy a city instead of conquering it, and where they bring back captives. That never happens in any other story in the Book of Mormon. All the stories about conquering in the Book of Mormon are to establish a tribute relationship. So
this one, they just wipe out.
They just wipe them out. Well, that's what it says. So they wipe them out. But they bring captives back. They specifically mention bringing captives back. And so there's several things about this. The anti-Nephi Lehis bury their weapons of war. Right. And you figure, okay, well, they bury their weapons of war. Well, if I bury $1 million in my backyard and I need some of it, I know where it is. But they never go dig up these weapons. So there's lots of things about it that are kind of unusual. If you put that in a Mesoamerican background, however, and you look at what's happening, there is a context that makes all of these things make sense. The anti-Nephi Lehis have been participants as Lamanites in a culture that had human sacrifice. They say in the text that they are all murderers. Well, the women and children, when did they murder anyone? Even the warriors, you never say you murder someone in battle. We just don't use that logic.
Oh, that's interesting.
But if you had participated in a religion that believed in human sacrifice, you might believe that you had now been a murderer and you don't want to do that. Well, the human sacrifice was also part of war. You don't want to stir up those feelings. So you bury your weapons so that you don't do that and never go back and revisit the things that you had done before. Why do they allow their children to go to war? It isn't the war. It's the feelings of the war. It's these things that stir up. And because their children were too young to have participated, they've now grown up. They don't have that problem. So it isn't the pacifists. It's the religious feelings. It's this, I don't want to murder anyone.
Oh, that's outstanding.
And so then the children are able to go back. Burying their weapons. Mesoamericans have a habit of caching or burying things that are given to the gods. And although it doesn't say so in the Book of Mormon, In most of the Mesoamerican caches, they're frequently broken because you break something to make sure that you give it to the god. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. In this context of Mesoamerica, they not only bury their weapons, but they break them as they put them in the ground because now they belong to God and they don't belong to man anymore. So that part of the story makes